The morning sun cast long shadows through the grand corridors of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla made her way through the east wing. Her heels clicked purposefully against the ancient stone floors, echoing off walls that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. But today's drama would be uniquely modern, born from tensions that had simmered beneath the surface of the royal family for years. Camilla paused before the portrait gallery, a magnificent hall lined with paintings of royals past and present. Her eyes immediately found what she was looking for, a stunning oil painting of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The portrait, commissioned during happier times, showed Catherine in her full regalia, radiating the grace and elegance that had made her beloved by millions around the world. The painting had been hung in a place of honor, directly across from portraits of previous queens consort. Its prominent position spoke volumes about Catherine's status within the family hierarchy. But as Camilla stood there, her expression hardened. The portrait represented everything she felt threatened by: Catherine's popularity, her natural royal bearing, and the public's obvious preference for the younger royal. "Your Majesty?" came a respectful voice from behind her. Camilla turned to see James Morrison, the head of palace security, approaching with measured steps. At 52, Morrison was a career palace guard who had served the royal family for over 2 decades. His loyalty was legendary, his discretion absolute, and his dedication to protecting the royal family's interests was unwavering. "James," Camilla acknowledged with a curt nod. "I trust you received my message about the adjustments needed in the portrait gallery." Morrison's weathered face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty. You wish for the Princess of Wales's portrait to be relocated." "Relocated?" Camilla's voice carried a sharp edge.
"No, James.
"I want it removed entirely. Stored away. This gallery represents the current royal hierarchy, and certain adjustments are necessary to reflect the proper order of things." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison had served through 3 monarchs, witnessed countless palace intrigues, and navigated the treacherous waters of royal politics with diplomatic skill. But this request struck him as something entirely different. It wasn't about protocol or tradition, it was personal. "Your Majesty," Morrison began carefully, "the portrait was commissioned by His Majesty the King and has been prominently displayed by royal decree. Perhaps, if I were to consult with—" "You will consult with no one," Camilla interrupted, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. The corridor was not empty, and palace walls had ears. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "This is a direct order from your queen consort. The portrait is to be removed by tonight. Is that understood?" Morrison felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. In his 23 years of service, he had never been asked to do something that felt so fundamentally wrong. The portrait wasn't just a painting, it was a symbol. Catherine had earned her place in that gallery through years of dedicated service, through her grace under pressure, and through the genuine love the British people felt for her. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest, "I must respectfully request that this order be put in writing and co-signed by His Majesty the King, as is protocol for any changes to the official portrait collection." She wasn't accustomed to being questioned, especially not by staff. Her rise to queen consort had been long and fraught with public skepticism, and she had fought hard for every ounce of respect and authority she now wielded. To have a mere guard question her orders felt like a direct challenge to her position. "Protocol?" she hissed. "I am your queen consort, James. My word is protocol. That portrait has become problematic. It sends the wrong message about the current state of the royal family." Morrison knew exactly what she meant. The tensions between Camilla and Catherine had been an open secret within palace circles for months. It had started subtly, Catherine being excluded from certain events, her initiatives receiving less support, her public appearances being quietly scaled back. But this was different. This was an open declaration of war. "With respect, Your Majesty, the Princess of Wales remains a senior member of the royal family. Her portrait represents a complication." Camilla cut him off. "One that I am addressing. Now, will you follow my orders, or do I need to find someone who will?" The threat was clear. Morrison's career, his pension, his entire life's work hung in the balance. He thought of his wife, Margaret, and their daughter, Sarah, who was just starting university. He thought of the modest home they had been able to afford thanks to his steady palace income. Everything could disappear with a single word from the queen consort. But he also thought about duty, not just to the crown, but to what the crown represented. He thought about Catherine, who had always treated the palace staff with genuine kindness and respect. He remembered the day she had personally thanked him for his service during a security incident, how she had asked about his family and remembered their names months later. "Your Majesty," Morrison said slowly, "I understand your position. However, I must follow proper procedures. Any removal of official portraits requires documentation through the appropriate channels." Camilla's face flushed with anger. "You forget yourself, James. I am not some minor royal making a frivolous request. I am the Queen Consort of England, and when I give an order, it is to be followed without question." The confrontation was drawing attention. Other staff members were beginning to notice the heated conversation, though they maintained a respectful distance. Camilla became aware of their presence and forced herself to regain composure, but her voice remained ice-cold. "You have until tonight," she said, turning on her heel. "If that portrait is still hanging there tomorrow morning, there will be consequences." As Camilla strode away, Morrison remained standing before Catherine's portrait. The painted eyes seemed to look directly at him, as if the princess herself was asking what he would do. The moral weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Word of the confrontation spread through the palace staff like wildfire. In hushed conversations in service corridors and break rooms, the story grew with each telling. Some sided with Camilla, arguing that as queen consort, her word was law. Others whispered that the request was petty and vindictive, unworthy of someone in her position. Margaret Morrison noticed her husband's distress the moment he walked through their modest cottage door that evening. After 25 years of marriage, she could read his moods better than anyone. "What happened today?" she asked, setting down her teacup as James slumped into his favorite armchair. Morrison stared into the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across his troubled face. "She wants me to remove Catherine's portrait from the gallery." "Remove it? Whatever for?" "Politics. Power. Jealousy." The words came out more bitter than Morrison intended. "She's making it personal, Margaret. This isn't about royal protocol or proper procedure. This is about one woman trying to diminish another." Margaret reached over and took her husband's weathered hand in hers. "What will you do?" "I don't know," Morrison admitted. "If I refuse, I could lose everything. But if I comply," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "You've never backed down from doing what's right before," Margaret said quietly. "This is different. The stakes are higher. It's not just about me anymore." That night, Morrison lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. He thought about his oath of service, about the meaning of loyalty, about the difference between following orders and doing what was right. Meanwhile, in her private chambers, Camilla paced furiously. The confrontation with Morrison had not gone as she expected. She was accustomed to immediate compliance with her wishes, and the guard's resistance felt like a personal insult. More than that, it felt like a challenge to her authority at a time when she could least afford to appear weak. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she rarely used directly, the head of palace personnel. "This is Her Majesty," she said when the call was answered. "I need you to review the service record of James Morrison in security. I want a full report on my desk by morning, including any passive businesses, irregularities, or concerns about his performance." The message was clear. If Morrison wouldn't comply willingly, perhaps a little pressure on his career prospects would change his mind. As the palace settled into its nightly quiet, with only the soft footsteps of night guards echoing through the corridors, Catherine's portrait continued to hang in its place of honor. The painted figure seemed to watch over the ancient halls with serene dignity, unaware that she had become the center of a brewing storm that would test the very foundations of palace loyalty and royal protocol. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the corridors of power and ultimately reveal the true character of everyone involved. Morrison's choice would come to define not just his own legacy, but the very nature of service to the crown in an age where personal vendettas threatened to overshadow duty and tradition. In the portrait gallery, surrounded by centuries of royal history, Catherine's image stood as a silent witness to the drama unfolding around her. a drama that would soon engulf the entire palace and capture the attention of a nation watching to see whether justice and integrity could prevail against petty politics and personal spite. The first rays of dawn pierced through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as James Morrison made his way to the portrait gallery. His decision had crystallized during the sleepless night. He would not remove Catherine's portrait, not without proper authorization from the king himself. The weight of this choice sat heavy on his shoulders, but his conscience was clear. As he entered the gallery, Morrison was surprised to find he wasn't alone. Standing before Catherine's portrait was Thomas Fletcher, the deputy head of palace security and Morrison's closest colleague for over 15 years. Fletcher, a man of similar age and disposition, had clearly been waiting for this moment. "Tom," Morrison acknowledged with a nod, "you're here early." Fletcher turned, his expression grave. "Word travels fast in these halls, James. I heard about yesterday's conversation with Her Majesty." Morrison studied his colleague's face, trying to read his intentions. In palace politics, allegiances could shift as quickly as the weather, and trust was a luxury that could prove costly. "And?" Morrison asked simply. "And I think you're making a mistake," Fletcher said, but his tone lacked conviction. "She's the queen consort, James. When she gives an order, we follow it. That's how this works." Morrison walked slowly toward Catherine's portrait, his footsteps echoing in the empty gallery. "Is it, Tom? Is blind obedience really what we swore to uphold when we took our oaths?" Fletcher followed, his internal struggle evident in his furrowed brow. "Our oaths were to serve the crown. That includes Her Majesty." "Our oaths were to serve with honor and integrity," Morrison corrected. "To uphold the dignity of the monarchy, not to enable petty vengeance." The two men stood in silence before the portrait, each lost in their own thoughts. Fletcher had witnessed the same tensions Morrison had seen, the gradual marginalization of Catherine, the subtle but persistent efforts to diminish her role. Like Morrison, he had noticed the way Camilla's demeanor changed whenever Catherine's name was mentioned, the tightening around her eyes that spoke of deep-seated resentment. "She could destroy you for this," Fletcher said quietly. "Your career, your pension, everything you've worked for." "I know," Morrison replied. "But what's the alternative? Remove the portrait of a beloved princess because her mother-in-law feels threatened? What does that say about us? What does that say about the institution we've devoted our lives to protecting?" Fletcher's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression darkened. "It's from personnel. They want to see you in 30 minutes. They're conducting a routine review of your service record." Morrison wasn't surprised. He had expected Camilla to move quickly to increase pressure on him. The palace bureaucracy was a well-oiled machine when it came to dealing with problematic staff members. "James," Fletcher said urgently, "it's not too late. You could remove the portrait this morning, claim there was a miscommunication about the timeline. Her Majesty might be willing to overlook your initial hesitation." Morrison turned to face his friend directly. "Tom, in all our years of service, have you ever seen anything like this? Have you ever been asked to do something that felt so fundamentally wrong?" Fletcher's silence was answer enough. He had seen royal temper tantrums, witnessed family disagreements, and dealt with his share of palace drama. But this felt different, more calculated, more vindictive. "The princess has done nothing wrong," Morrison continued. "Her only crime is being loved by the people and respected by her peers. She serves the crown with dignity and grace. She deserves better than this." As if summoned by their conversation, the gallery doors opened and Catherine herself entered, flanked by two of her personal protection officers. She moved with characteristic grace, apparently unaware of the drama surrounding her portrait. She had come for her scheduled morning review of upcoming security arrangements for her public engagements. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison, Mr. Prazy." "Fletcher," Catherine said with a warm smile that seemed to light up the ancient hall. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important."
"Your Royal Highness," they replied in unison, offering respectful bows. Catherine's eyes moved naturally to her portrait, and for a moment, a shadow of uncertainty crossed her face.
Palace gossip traveled through certain channels, and while the details might be unclear, she was undoubtedly aware that something was amiss.
"Is everything quite all right?" she asked, her intuition clearly sensing the tension in the room.
Morrison felt the weight of the moment. Here was the woman at the center of the controversy, gracious and concerned about others despite whatever pressures she might be facing. The contrast with Camilla's behavior the previous day could not have been more stark. "Everything is fine, Your Royal Highness," Morrison assured her.
"Fletcher and I were simply reviewing security protocols for the gallery." Catherine nodded, though her intelligent eyes suggested she understood there was more to the situation.
"I want to thank you both, and all the security staff for your continued dedication."
"I know the recent Tennessee's and Palace dynamics have created additional challenges for everyone." The careful diplomacy of her words spoke volumes. She was acknowledging the difficulties without directly criticizing anyone, showing the kind of leadership and emotional intelligence that had made her so effective in her royal role. "It's our honor to serve, Your Royal Highness," Morrison replied, and meant every word. After Catherine and her security detail departed, Fletcher and Morrison stood in renewed silence. The contrast between Catherine's grace and Camilla's vindictive demands had crystallized something important for Fletcher. "She didn't deserve Diana's fate," Fletcher said suddenly, referring to the late Princess of Wales, "and she doesn't deserve this either." Morrison understood the reference. Many long-serving palace staff remembered the painful final years of Diana's marriage, the way she had been gradually isolated and marginalized. The parallels to Catherine's current situation were uncomfortably obvious. "No, she doesn't," Morrison agreed. Fletcher looked around the gallery at centuries of royal portraits bearing witness to their conversation. "What if you're right? What if this is about more than just removing a painting?" "Then we have a choice to make," Morrison said. "We can be part of something ugly, or we can stand for something better." Fletcher's phone buzzed again. Another message from personnel, this time asking for his immediate presence as well. The pressure campaign was expanding. "They're calling you in too," Morrison observed. "Guilty by association." Fletcher stared at his phone for a long moment, then looked back at Catherine's portrait. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm with newfound resolve. "Let them call me in. I've got nothing to be ashamed of." The two men walked together toward the personnel office, their footsteps echoing through corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. Behind them, Catherine's portrait remained in its place of honor, a symbol of grace under pressure that would soon inspire others to find their own courage. The personnel office was located in the administrative wing of the castle, a maze of smaller rooms that housed the bureaucratic machinery that kept the royal household functioning. As Morrison and Fletcher approached the main office, they could see increased activity, staff members moving with unusual urgency, phones ringing more frequently than normal. Margaret Whitfield, the head of personnel, was a formidable woman in her early 60s who had managed palace human resources for over 20 years. She had survived multiple royal scandals and staff upheavals through a combination of diplomatic skill and strategic silence. Her summons was never good news. "Mr. Morrison," she said as he entered her office, her voice carefully neutral. "Please, have a seat." Fletcher was directed to a waiting area outside, a clear signal that they would be dealt with separately. The divide-and-conquer strategy was a classic palace maneuver. Whitfield's office was spartanly decorated, with only a few official photographs and certificates on the walls. The lack of personal touches was deliberate. In palace politics, too much personality could be interpreted as taking sides. "James," she began, using his first name in a calculated display of familiarity, "you've served this family with distinction for over 2 decades. Your record is exemplary." Morrison waited for the inevitable but. "But," Whitfield continued right on cue, "there have been some concerns raised about your recent performance, specifically about your willingness to follow direct orders from senior members of the royal family." Morrison kept his expression neutral. "Could you be more specific about these concerns?" Whitfield consulted a file on her desk, though Morrison suspected she had memorized its contents. "Yesterday, you were given a direct instruction by Her Majesty the Queen Consort. This instruction has not been carried out, despite having ample time to do so. The instruction was to remove an official royal portrait from the portrait gallery," Morrison said. "Such actions typically require written authorization and approval through proper channels. The Queen Consort's verbal instruction should have been sufficient," Whitfield replied. "Your hesitation suggests a lack of confidence in her authority." Morrison felt anger rising in his chest, but kept his voice level. My hesitation suggests adherence to established protocols that have served this institution well for decades. Whitfield leaned back in her chair, studying Morrison's face. James, you're a good man, a loyal servant of the Crown. I would hate to see your career end on a sour note over something that could be easily resolved. The threat was elegantly delivered but unmistakable. Morrison was being offered one final chance to comply before facing the consequences. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Morrison asked. "I'm asking you to follow the Queen Consort's instructions. Remove the portrait. File the appropriate paperwork afterward. We can frame it as routine maintenance or rotation of the collection." Morrison realized that Whitfield was offering him a face-saving way out. The portrait would still be removed, but the paperwork trail would make it look like a standard procedure rather than a vindictive power play. "And if I refuse?" Whitfield's expression hardened slightly. "Then I would have no choice but to recommend your immediate suspension pending a full disciplinary review. Such reviews can be lengthy and expensive if you choose to challenge them." Morrison understood the implications. A disciplinary review could drag on for months, during which he would be suspended without pay. Even if he eventually won, the financial and emotional toll could be devastating. And there was no guarantee he would win. Palace disciplinary procedures heavily favored the institution. "I need time to consider this," Morrison said. "Of course," Whitfield agreed. "You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to make your decision. After that, the matter will be taken out of both our hands." As Morrison left the personnel office, Fletcher was just being called in for his own meeting. The two men exchanged a meaningful look but couldn't speak openly with so many staff members around. Morrison walked slowly through the palace corridors, his mind racing through options and implications. He could comply, remove the portrait, and probably salvage his career. Or he could stand firm and likely lose everything he had worked for over the past 23 years. But as he passed through the portrait gallery again, Catherine's painted eyes seemed to watch him with quiet dignity. He thought about what the portrait represented, not just a beautiful woman in royal regalia, but the embodiment of service, grace, and integrity under pressure. The choice was becoming clearer, even if the consequences remained terrifying. In another part of the palace, Camilla was receiving updates on the pressure campaign against Morrison. Her satisfaction was evident as she learned about the personnel meetings and the ultimatum that had been delivered. "And if he still refuses?" she asked her private secretary. "Then he'll be suspended and likely dismissed within the month," came the reply. "A replacement can be found who will be more amenable to your instructions." Camilla nodded with satisfaction. She had not risen to her current position by backing down from challenges to her authority. If Morrison wanted to make this a test of wills, she was prepared to show him exactly who held the real power in this palace. But neither Camilla nor her supporters had anticipated the quiet revolution that was beginning to stir among the palace staff. Morrison's stand was becoming a symbol of something larger, a rejection of the petty politics and vindictive behavior that threatened to corrupt the very institution they had all sworn to protect. The real battle was just beginning. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the palace kitchens as news of Morrison's ultimatum spread through the staff quarters like wildfire. Mary Stevens, the head chef who had served the royal family for 18 years, paused in her preparation of the evening meal as one of the kitchen assistants whispered the latest developments. "They're really going to sack him?" asked Sarah Chen, a young pastry chef who had joined the palace staff just 6 months earlier. "For refusing to take down a painting?" Mary wiped her hands on her apron, her expression thoughtful. She had seen enough palace politics to understand that this controversy ran much deeper than a simple disagreement about artwork. "It's not about the painting, love," Mary explained patiently. "It's about power, about who gets to make decisions and who has to follow them, no matter how wrong they might be." The kitchen felt unusually quiet as staff members processed this explanation. Many of them had grown fond of Catherine during her frequent visits to thank the kitchen staff for special events. She always remembered their names, asked about their families, and treated them with genuine respect, a stark contrast to some other members of the royal family. "Morrison's a good man," said David Walsh, the head groundskeeper, who had just entered the kitchen for his afternoon tea. "Been fair to all of us over the years. This whole business doesn't sit right." Word of the controversy had reached every corner of the palace by now. In the housekeeping department, senior staff members were having hushed conversations about what Morrison's potential dismissal might mean for all of them. If a guard with 23 years of impeccable service could be fired for following proper protocols, what did that say about job security for the rest of them? Elena Rodriguez, the head housekeeper, found herself in a particularly uncomfortable position. She had been personally asked by Camilla's private secretary to ensure that certain adjustments were made to the Queen Consort's quarters, adjustments that would remove several photographs and mementos related to Catherine's charitable work. "It's getting out of hand," Elena confided to her assistant, Patricia Moore, as they reviewed the day's cleaning schedule in a small office adjoining the main housekeeping stores. Patricia, a practical woman in her 50s who had worked in the palace for over a decade, shook her head in disgust. "What's next? Are we supposed to pretend the princess doesn't exist? Scrub her out of palace history like some Soviet dictator?" The comparison was more apt than Patricia realized. Throughout history, powerful figures had attempted to erase their rivals from official records and public memory. But the palace staff were beginning to understand that they had a choice about whether to participate in such efforts. Meanwhile, in the royal mews where the state vehicles were maintained, head chauffeur Robert Knight was having his own crisis of conscience. He had been instructed to ensure that Catherine's official car would be unavailable for several upcoming engagements, forcing her to either cancel events or use less formal transportation that would diminish her public presence. Knight had driven Catherine to hundreds of events over the years. He had seen firsthand how she prepared for each appearance, reviewing briefing materials in the car, practicing her speeches, and always asking about the people she would meet. Her dedication to her role was genuine and inspiring. "This isn't right, Rob," said his deputy, Michael Stevens, as they stood in the pristine garage surrounded by gleaming state vehicles. "The princess has done nothing wrong. She's one of the best of them, if you ask me." Knight nodded grimly. "I know, Mike. But orders are orders. At least, that's what they keep telling us." The pressure campaign against Morrison was having an unintended effect. Rather than isolating him, it was galvanizing other staff members who were beginning to question their own complicity in what felt like an orchestrated campaign of harassment. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, something unprecedented happened. Thomas Fletcher, still reeling from his own meeting with personnel, made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to his normal duties, he walked directly to the quarters of Sir Edmund Harley, the Lord Chamberlain and senior-most administrator of the royal household. Sir Edmund, a distinguished gentleman in his late 60s who had served the crown for over 40 years, was reviewing correspondence in his private office when Fletcher requested an urgent audience. "Mr. Fletcher," Sir Edmund said, looking up from his papers with mild surprise. "This is highly irregular. You should have scheduled an appointment through my secretary." "With respect, Sir Edmund, the situation I need to discuss with you is also highly irregular," Fletcher replied, his voice steady despite his nervousness. Something in Fletcher's tone made the Lord Chamberlain set down his papers and give the security officer his full attention. "Please sit down," Sir Edmund said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Tell me what's troubling you." Fletcher had spent the previous hour agonizing over this decision. Speaking directly to the Lord Chamberlain about internal palace matters was a serious breach of protocol that could end his career just as surely as Morrison's defiance might end his. But Fletcher had concluded that some things were more important than protocol. "Sir Edmund, I'm here to report what I believe to be an abuse of authority that threatens the integrity of this institution," Fletcher began formally. The Lord Chamberlain's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his composed demeanor. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Fletcher. Please continue." Fletcher recounted the previous day's confrontation between Camilla and Morrison, the pressure tactics being employed by personnel, and the broader pattern of actions aimed at marginalizing Catherine. He spoke carefully but comprehensively, presenting facts rather than opinions. When Fletcher finished, Sir Edmund sat in thoughtful silence for several long moments. As Lord Chamberlain, he was acutely aware of the delicate balance required to manage royal family dynamics while maintaining the dignity and stability of the monarchy. "Mr. Fletcher," Sir Edmund finally said, "are you certain of these facts? Are you prepared to stand by this account if questioned formally?" "Yes, Sir Edmund." Absolutely. The Lord Chamberlain rose from his desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace grounds where tourists and staff moved about their daily business, unaware of the crisis brewing within the ancient walls. "The removal of official portraits requires my authorization," Sir Edmund said finally. "I have received no such request, nor would I approve one without compelling justification and proper documentation." Fletcher felt a surge of hope. If the Lord Chamberlain was willing to intervene, Morrison might yet be saved. "What happens now, Sir Edmund?" "Now, Mr. Fletcher, we follow proper procedures. I will be having conversations with both Her Majesty the Queen Consort and His Majesty the King about these matters. In the meantime, I want you to document everything you've told me in a formal written statement." As Fletcher left the Lord Chamberlain's office, he felt lighter than he had in days. But he also understood that the battle was far from over. Camilla would not take kindly to having her authority challenged, especially by someone as senior as Sir Edmund. Meanwhile, Morrison was spending his final hours before the deadline walking through the palace grounds, trying to clear his head and prepare for whatever came next. The gardens were peaceful, filled with the late afternoon sound of birds and the distant hum of London traffic beyond the palace walls. He found himself in a secluded corner of the Rose Garden, sitting on a bench that offered a view of the palace's historic facade. This institution had survived world wars, political upheavals, and countless family dramas. It had endured because people like him had been willing to put duty and principle above personal comfort. His phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you." The simple message from his wife strengthened Morrison's resolve. He thought about their daughter Sarah, about the kind of world he wanted to leave for her. Was it one where people in positions of power could abuse that power without consequence? Or was it one where ordinary people were willing to stand up for what was right, even when it cost them dearly? As 5 o'clock approached, Morrison made his way back to the personnel office. A small crowd had gathered near the administrative wing. Word had spread that this was the moment of truth. Staff members who should have been finishing their daily duties were lingering in corridors, pretending to be busy while actually waiting to see what would happen. Margaret Whitfield was waiting in her office, her expression carefully neutral. "Morrison," she said as he entered, "have you reached a decision?" Morrison stood straight, his voice clear and unwavering. "Yes, ma'am, I will not be removing the Princess of Wales's portrait from the gallery. If you wish to proceed with disciplinary action, that is your prerogative." Whitfield nodded slowly, as if she had expected this answer. "Very well. Consider yourself suspended pending a full disciplinary review. You are to surrender your access credentials and vacate the premises immediately." As Morrison handed over his security badge and keys, he felt a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made. There was no going back now. But as he walked through the palace corridors for what might be the last time as an employee, something remarkable happened. Staff members began to emerge from their work areas: kitchen staff, housekeepers, gardeners, administrative workers. They didn't speak, but their presence was unmistakable support. Elena Rodriguez stood in a doorway, her eyes meeting Morrison's with obvious respect. David Walsh removed his cap as Morrison passed. Mary Stevens stepped out of the kitchen, her apron still flour-dusted from the day's baking, and nodded solemnly. Morrison realized that his stand had become something larger than he had intended. It had become a symbol of integrity in an environment where integrity was increasingly rare. As he reached the main exit, Morrison turned back for one last look at the palace that had been his professional home for over 2 decades. Somewhere within those walls, Catherine's portrait still hung in its place of honor. And perhaps that was victory enough. The real test would come in the days ahead, as the palace staff and the wider royal family grappled with the implications of what had transpired. Morrison had lit a spark of resistance that could either be extinguished or grow into something that would transform the very culture of the royal household. In her private chambers, Camilla received word of Morrison's suspension with satisfaction, but also with growing awareness that the situation was not unfolding as simply as she had anticipated. Reports were reaching her of staff unrest and whispered conversations about Morrison's courage. More troubling still, her private secretary had informed her that the Lord Chamberlain had requested an urgent audience with her the following morning. Sir Edmund Harley was not a man who could be easily intimidated or dismissed, and his involvement suggested that the matter was escalating beyond her control. For the first time since the controversy began, Camilla felt a flicker of uncertainty. She had assumed that removing one stubborn guard would send a clear message about her authority. Instead, it seemed to have awakened something dangerous, a sense among the staff that they had the right to question her decisions. The battle lines were drawn, but the outcome remained very much in doubt. The morning of Sir Edmund Harley's audience with Queen Camilla dawned gray and drizzly, matching the somber mood that had settled over Windsor Castle. Word of Morison's suspension had spread beyond the palace walls overnight, reaching the ears of royal correspondents and palace insiders who understood the significance of what was unfolding. Sir Edmund prepared for the meeting with his characteristic thoroughness, reviewing Fletcher's written statement and consulting the official protocols governing royal portrait management. As Lord Chamberlain, he had navigated countless delicate situations over his 4 decades of service, but this felt different, more personal, and potentially more damaging to the monarchy's reputation. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the Queen Consort's private study, a richly appointed room that Camilla had redecorated shortly after her coronation. The walls were lined with portraits and photographs that told the story of her journey from divorced socialite to Queen Consort, a journey that had required considerable determination and political skill. Camilla was waiting when Sir Edmund arrived, seated behind an ornate writing desk that had once belonged to Queen Mary. She had chosen her position carefully, using the furniture and room layout to emphasize her authority. But Sir Edmund was not easily intimidated by such theatrics. "Sir Edmund," Camilla said without rising, her voice carrying the formal tone she used when asserting her position, "I understand you wished to discuss some administrative matters with me." "Your Majesty," Sir Edmund replied with a respectful bow, "I wanted to discuss the recent events concerning Mr. Morison and the portrait gallery." Camilla's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Morison's suspension was a personnel matter. He failed to follow direct orders from his Queen Consort. Such insubordination cannot be tolerated. Sir Edmund remained standing, his posture formal but confident. "With respect, Your Majesty, the removal of official portraits from the palace gallery requires my authorization as Lord Chamberlain. No such authorization was requested or granted." "I am the Queen Consort," Camilla replied sharply. "My instruction should have been sufficient." "Your Majesty, the protocols governing the palace collection exist to protect the institution, not to constrain it. These protocols have served the monarchy well for generations." Camilla rose from her desk, her anger beginning to show despite her attempts to maintain royal composure. "Are you questioning my authority, Sir Edmund?" "I am questioning the wisdom of circumventing established procedures," Sir Edmund replied calmly. "Particularly procedures designed to prevent exactly this sort of controversy." The two faced each other across the elegant room, representatives of different approaches to royal service. Camilla saw authority as something to be asserted and enforced. Sir Edmund understood it as something to be earned and maintained through consistent adherence to principle. "The Princess of Wales's portrait has become problematic," Camilla said, attempting to justify her position. "Its continued prominence sends confusing messages about the current family hierarchy. Your Majesty, the Princess of Wales remains a senior member of the royal family. Her portrait represents her service to the crown and the British people. Its removal without cause would indeed send a message, but not the one you might intend." The implication was clear. Such an action would be seen as petty and vindictive, exactly the sort of behavior that could damage public perception of the monarchy. Camilla turned to face the window, her mind racing through the implications of Sir Edmund's words. She had not anticipated this level of institutional resistance to her wishes. "What do you suggest, Sir Edmund?" she asked finally. "I suggest, Your Majesty, that Mr. Morison be reinstated with full honors, that the portrait gallery remain unchanged, and that we focus our energies on more constructive endeavors." The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Camilla understood that this was a moment of choice. She could escalate the conflict by dismissing Sir Edmund's advice, or she could find a face-saving way to retreat. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Sir Edmund's response was measured but firm. "Then I would be obliged to discuss this matter with His Majesty the King. I believe he would be concerned about actions that might damage the monarchy's reputation for fairness and dignity." The mention of the king changed the dynamic entirely. Camilla realized that Sir Edmund was not acting alone. He had considered the broader implications and was prepared to involve the highest authority in the realm if necessary. Before Camilla could respond, her private secretary entered with an urgent message. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales has requested an immediate audience with you. The timing was not coincidental. William had clearly been informed of the situation and had decided to intervene personally. As the heir apparent and Catherine's husband, his involvement carried enormous significance. Show him in, Camilla said, her voice betraying a hint of anxiety. Prince William entered with purposeful strides, his expression serious but controlled. He nodded respectfully to Sir Edmund before turning his attention to Camilla. Camilla, he said, using her personal name rather than her title, a subtle but meaningful choice. I believe we need to discuss recent events. The presence of the future king shifted the entire dynamic in the room. William's relationship with Camilla had always been complex, shaped by the painful history surrounding his mother's death and Camilla's role in his father's life. But over the years, they had developed a working relationship based on mutual respect for their shared commitment to the monarchy. William, Camilla replied, gesturing to a chair. Please, sit down. I prefer to stand, William said, a decision that kept the conversation formal and serious. I've been informed about the situation regarding Mr. Morrison and my wife's portrait. Sir Edmund discreetly moved toward the door, sensing that this conversation needed to be private. But William stopped him with a gesture. Please stay, Sir Edmund. Your counsel in this matter has been invaluable. William turned back to Camilla, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. I want to understand why a loyal member of our staff has been suspended for following proper protocols. Camilla felt the ground shifting beneath her. She had expected to handle this as an internal administrative matter, but it was rapidly becoming a formal challenge to her decision-making. The guard in question refused to follow a direct order, she explained, her voice less confident than before. The guard in question followed established procedures that exist to protect this institution, William corrected. Procedures that have served us well and should not be circumvented without compelling reason. William moved closer to Camilla's desk, his presence commanding despite his respectful tone. More importantly, this situation has created exactly the sort of family drama that we have worked so hard to avoid. The staff are talking, the press will inevitably hear about it, and the whole business reflects poorly on all of us. The mention of public perception struck home. Camilla had fought too hard for acceptance and respect to risk damaging her reputation over what was beginning to look like a petty dispute. What would you have me do, William? She asked. I would have you do what any leader should do when they realize they've made a mistake, William replied. Acknowledge it, correct it, and move forward with dignity. The words hung in the air like a challenge. William was offering her a path to redemption, but it required admitting error, something that did not come naturally to someone who had fought so hard for her current position. Sir Edmund stepped forward slightly. Your Majesty, if I may suggest a course of action that preserves everyone's dignity? Both William and Camilla turned to him, sensing that the experienced Lord Chamberlain had found a diplomatic solution. Mr. Persa, Morrison could be reinstated on the grounds that there was a miscommunication about authorization procedures, Sir Edmund proposed. No one loses face, proper protocols are reaffirmed, and we can all focus on more important matters. That seems entirely reasonable. Camilla realized she was being offered a graceful exit from a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. The alternative, continuing to fight against the combined opposition of the Lord Chamberlain and the heir apparent, would likely end in humiliating defeat. Very well, she said finally. I'll have my secretary contact personnel about Mr. Seal. Morrison's reinstatement. 1. Immediately. William added, making it clear this was not a suggestion. Immediately. Camilla agreed. As the meeting concluded, William lingered for a private word with Camilla while Sir Edmund departed to begin the process of Morrison's reinstatement. Camilla, William said, his tone becoming more personal. I understand the pressures you face in your role. But Catherine is not your enemy. She has never been anything but respectful toward you and supportive of this family. Camilla nodded, feeling a mixture of resentment and shame. I know that, William. Sometimes the pressures, they make you see threats where none exist. The only threat to this family comes from within. when we allow personal grievances to overcome our duty to the institution," William said gently but firmly. "We all need to be better than that." After William left, Camilla sat alone in her study, staring at the official photographs and royal memorabilia that surrounded her. She had achieved everything she had dreamed of: royal status, public acceptance, a position of influence. But this incident had shown her how quickly it could all be undermined by poor judgment and petty behavior. Meanwhile, throughout the palace, word was spreading that Morrison would be reinstated. The news was received with quiet satisfaction by staff members who had witnessed his courageous stand. More importantly, it sent a message that integrity and proper procedure still mattered in the royal household. When Sir Edmund personally delivered the news to Morrison at his home that afternoon, the suspended guard felt a mixture of relief and vindication. But he also understood that returning to work would not be without challenges. "The Queen Consort has agreed to your immediate reinstatement," Sir Edmund explained. "There will be no mark on your record, and no reference to this incident in your file." "Thank you, Sir Edmund, and please thank His Royal Highness as well." "You can thank him yourself when you return to duty tomorrow," Sir Edmund said with a slight smile. "I believe he'll want to personally acknowledge your service." That evening, as Morrison prepared to return to work, he reflected on the lessons of the past few days. He had learned that doing the right thing often came at great personal cost, but also that standing up for principle could inspire others to do the same. In the portrait gallery, Catherine's painting continued to hang in its place of honor, a symbol of grace under pressure and dignity in the face of adversity. But it had become something more, a reminder that even in the most traditional and hierarchical institutions, individuals could still make choices that upheld justice and integrity. The crisis had passed, but its effects would linger. The palace staff had learned that they had more power than they realized when they stood together for what was right, and the royal family had been reminded that their strength came not from arbitrary authority, but from their commitment to the values and principles that made the monarchy worthy of respect. The real test would be whether these lessons would endure, or whether the pressures of royal life would eventually erode the memory of Morrison's stand and return the palace to its old patterns of behavior. 3 months had passed since the portrait controversy, and Windsor Castle had settled into a new rhythm. The autumn light streaming through the portrait gallery's tall windows cast a golden glow over Catherine's painting, which remained in its honored position, though its significance had evolved far beyond mere decoration. James Morrison walked through the gallery during his morning security rounds, his steps measured and confident. His reinstatement had been handled with the diplomatic grace that Sir Edmund Harley was famous for, but the underlying changes in the palace atmosphere were profound and lasting. The relationship between Morrison and Queen Camilla had necessarily evolved. Their interactions were now formally correct but distant, each maintaining the respect required by their positions, while acknowledging the events that had fundamentally altered their dynamic. Camilla had learned a valuable lesson about the limits of arbitrary authority, while Morrison had discovered that principled resistance could succeed when supported by institutional integrity. On this particular morning, Morrison was surprised to find Catherine herself in the gallery, standing thoughtfully before her own portrait. She turned as he approached, offering the warm smile that had made her beloved by both palace staff and the British public. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting your rounds." "Not at all, Your Royal Highness," Morrison replied. "I was just conducting routine security checks." Catherine nodded toward her portrait. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." "I know it couldn't have been easy standing up to family politics." Morrison felt touched by her gratitude, but also slightly uncomfortable with being thanked for simply doing his job as he understood it. "Your Royal Highness, I was merely following proper procedures. Any guard worth his salt would have done the same." Catherine's expression suggested she knew better. Not everyone would have been willing to risk their career for principle. "Mr. Morrison, your courage inspired others throughout the palace. That matters more than you might realize." She was right about the broader impact. The incident had created a new awareness among palace staff about their collective power and responsibility. Department heads were more willing to question problematic orders, and there was a renewed emphasis on following established procedures rather than bending to personal whims. "If I may say so, Your Royal Highness," Morrison said carefully, "the real courage belonged to those who supported what was right, even when it wasn't easy for them." Catherine understood he was referring obliquely to Prince William's intervention and Sir Edmund's principled stand. The incident had reminded everyone that the royal family's strength came from unity of purpose rather than arbitrary hierarchy. As their conversation concluded, Catherine made her way to another part of the castle where she was scheduled to meet with Sir Edmund about upcoming charitable initiatives. The Lord Chamberlain had become an even more trusted advisor since the portrait incident, his willingness to stand up for institutional integrity having impressed both William and King Charles. In Sir Edmund's office, the conversation quickly turned to broader questions about palace culture and governance. Catherine had been thinking deeply about the lessons of recent months and wanted to discuss how to prevent similar situations in the future. "Sir Edmund," she began, "I've been reflecting on recent events, and I wonder if we might consider some adjustments to how palace administration works." The Lord Chamberlain leaned forward with interest. "What sort of adjustments did you have in mind, Your Royal Highness?" "I think we need clearer protocols about decision-making authority," Catherine explained. "Staff members should never be put in the position Mr. Pickett." Morrison found himself caught between conflicting interpretations of proper procedure. Sir Edmund nodded approvingly. "I've had similar thoughts. Perhaps we could establish a more formal review process for any changes to palace collections or protocols." "Exactly," Catherine agreed. "And maybe we could create better channels for staff to raise concerns without fear of retaliation." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, ranging across various aspects of palace governance. Both agreed that the Morrison incident, while painful, had revealed important weaknesses that could be addressed through thoughtful reform. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Queen Camilla was having her own reflective conversation with her private secretary, Lady Amanda Forsyth. The past months had been a period of difficult self-examination for the Queen Consort, who had been forced to confront the way her insecurities had nearly created a serious scandal. "Amanda," Camilla said as they reviewed her schedule for the coming week, "I want to discuss something with you about palace relationships." Lady Amanda, a diplomatic woman who had served the royal family for 15 years, waited attentively. "I've been thinking about the incident with Mr. Grove." "Morrison," Camilla continued, using the euphemistic language that had become standard when referring to the controversy. "I realize that my approach may have been counterproductive. It was as close to an admission of error as anyone had heard from the Queen Consort since the incident concluded." "Your Majesty, these situations are always complicated," Lady Amanda replied diplomatically. "The important thing is that it was resolved satisfactorily."
"Yes, but I want to ensure it doesn't happen again," Camilla said.
"I think it would be beneficial if I had better communication with the Princess of Wales. We should be working together, not at cross purposes." Lady Amanda recognized this as a significant moment. For months, she had watched the relationship between the two women deteriorate, fed by misunderstandings and competing advisors who seemed to benefit from family conflict. "I think that's an excellent idea, Your Majesty. Perhaps you might consider inviting the princess to collaborate on one of your charitable initiatives?" Camilla nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that might work well. Something high-profile that would demonstrate our unity of purpose." The conversation represented a genuine shift in Camilla's thinking. The Morrison incident had forced her to confront the reality that her position as Queen Consort was strengthened, not weakened, by good relationships with other senior royals. 2 weeks later, this new approach bore fruit when Camilla and Catherine appeared together at a literacy event for underprivileged children. The joint appearance was carefully orchestrated, but the warmth between the two women appeared genuine. Palace observers noted how Camilla made several obvious efforts to highlight Catherine's contributions to the cause. Behind the scenes, the relationship was still fragile, but both women had learned important lessons. Camilla understood that her authority was most effective when exercised collaboratively, rather than arbitrarily. Catherine had gained new appreciation for the pressures facing her mother-in-law and the importance of clear communication in preventing misunderstandings. James Morrison, watching the security arrangements for the joint event, felt a deep satisfaction at this evidence of improved family dynamics. His stand had been vindicated not just by his reinstatement, but by the positive changes it had catalyzed throughout the royal household. Thomas Fletcher, who had been promoted to deputy head of palace security in recognition of his integrity during the crisis, joined Morrison in observing the smooth coordination of the event. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Fletcher observed quietly. Good leadership creates good followers, Morrison replied. When people see others doing the right thing, it makes it easier for them to do the right thing too. The event proceeded flawlessly, with Camilla and Catherine working together seamlessly to engage with the children and highlight the importance of literacy education. Press coverage was uniformly positive, focusing on the unity and shared commitment of the royal family. In the months that followed, the changes initiated by the Morrison incident continued to evolve. Sir Edmund Harley implemented new governance protocols that gave palace staff clearer guidelines and better protection when following proper procedures. A new advisory committee was established to review any proposed changes to palace collections or protocols, ensuring that decisions were made transparently and with appropriate consultation. Perhaps most importantly, the incident had reminded everyone involved that the monarchy's strength came from its commitment to principles rather than personalities. The crown endured not because of the arbitrary exercise of authority, but because of its dedication to serving something greater than individual interests. Morrison's daughter Sarah, now in her second year at university, often asked her father about his experience during those difficult days. He would tell her that the most important lesson was that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they had the courage to stand up for what was right. "But weren't you scared?" Sarah would ask. "Terrified," Morrison would admit. "But sometimes being scared is exactly when you need to be most brave." A year after the incident, Morrison received an unexpected honor when he was awarded the Royal Victorian Order for Distinguished Service to the Crown. The ceremony was small and private, but the message was clear. Integrity and principled service were valued at the highest levels of the monarchy. Catherine presented the award personally, with Camilla in attendance, as a gesture of respect and reconciliation. The three of them stood together afterward for official photographs. The portrait controversy, now a closed chapter in palace history. In his brief acceptance speech, Morrison spoke about the importance of institutional integrity and the collective responsibility of everyone who served the crown to uphold its values. He thanked his colleagues for their support and emphasized that the real honor belonged to all those who chose principle over convenience. The portrait remained in its place in the gallery, but it had become something more than a beautiful painting of a beloved royal. It had become a symbol of the idea that even the most traditional institutions could change and improve when individuals had the courage to stand up for what was right. Years later, when palace historians wrote about this period, they would note how a simple dispute over a portrait had revealed profound truths about leadership, integrity, and the evolution of the modern monarchy. The incident had tested the institution's commitment to its own stated values and found it strong enough to choose principle over expedience. Morrison continued his service for several more years before retiring to spend more time with his growing family. His legacy lived on in the improved protocols and stronger institutional culture that emerged from his moment of courage. He had proven that in even the most hierarchical organizations, individuals could make choices that honored the best traditions while creating space for positive change. The portrait of Catherine continued to hang in the gallery, watched over by successive generations of palace guards, who understood that their duty extended beyond simply following orders to upholding the principles that made their service meaningful. And in that understanding, Morrison's quiet revolution lived on, a testament to the enduring power of conscience over convenience and integrity over expediency.